IASA delivers an incredible conference and trade show dedicated to insurance accounting and finance professionals. Join your peers at IASA's 2024 Exchange and On Point event, taking place June 2nd through the 5th in Pittsburgh. The schedule is packed with engaging speakers, networking, and fun social events. Register before March 31st and save. Visit iasa.org for more details.
Hello and welcome to In the Know, the CPCU Society Unscripted. In the Know is your podcast connection to the top innovators, strategists, storytellers, thought leaders, movers, shakers, and go-getters in the risk management and insurance community. Get an inside, unscripted look at how they got here, where they're going, and how you can benefit from their experience and insight. Your host for In the Know is Chris Hampshire, an insurance industry veteran, CPCU designation holder, and a CPCU Society volunteer leader. In the Know with Chris Hampshire starts right now.
Hi, Chris Hampshire here, welcoming you back to In the Know, the CPCU Society Unscripted. Thanks again for joining us. We're recording today at the 2023 Inter-Risk Conference in Washington, D.C. These on-site recordings are brought to you by Gallagher Bassett. Thanks again for joining us. Today, I am happy to welcome Mike Koscielny. Mike is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Born to Lead, LLC. Mike, thanks so much for joining me. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
So Mike has more than 40 years of experience creating effective teams and innovative processes for underwriting and pricing for various insurance companies. He currently serves as Director of Marketing for graduate programs for the University of Olivet. He is an instructor for the National Alliance CISR and CIC designations and a facilitated CPCU study group leader for the Institutes. Mike has held many roles for the Institute CPCU Society, including the 2017 Global President of the Society, the 2017 and 18 President of the Underwriting Executives Council, and he is the current 2023 President of the Society of Insurance Trainers and Educators. He has written numerous articles and given many presentations. He also published his first book, Born to Lead, Lessons in Leadership, just this year. We're going to be talking about that quite a bit. I'll also disclose that I've known Mike for many years. I'm going to say going back a decade or so. Mike, thanks for joining us. I think the first question, and I look around here, I see a lot of familiar faces looking and eyeing you up as we're here in the podcast studio. I think it'd be great for our audience to hear your story. So Sure. Can you share how you got to where you are today?
How I got to where I am right now. Yep. You know, I'm not unlike most people who got out of college and didn't have any idea that insurance was where I would end up. I had an economics history major, and there weren't a lot of jobs. But I ended up working for a bank and then ended up in the life insurance sales business. And I did that for a couple of years. It was pretty successful, but it was a lot of nights and weekends. And so I applied for a job as an underwriter. And I worked for Safeco Insurance for 20 years, lots of different roles in many parts of the country, Cincinnati, St. Louis, and Chicago primarily. Then I left them after 20 years and pursued an opportunity with AAA in Michigan. I then moved from there to Cincinnati to a specialty company, American Modern. And then I got lured to go to Florida and spent 9 years working for a property-only insurer there. And it was it's a very interesting experience to sort of done business in virtually every state. I did personal and commercial lines. I sold insurance for a while with a couple agencies. And there's a real interesting perspective I have for the business because of that. I've sat in so many different chairs.
So what about insurance appeals to you? How do you think it became your calling in a sense?
I think about that and have for a lot. And I think the one thing that I always felt was really the most important part of what we do in this business is that when there's a natural disaster, the first thing that happens is the first responders are in there. And when they leave, who's next? It's the insurance people. We're there to put people's lives back together. And to me, that's such a noble thing to do. Yeah, we get premium for it, and we try to make a reasonable profit. But the reality is that most of the people I know that are in this business really care about the people that they insure, and that's the piece that I always took away from it. I feel really, really blessed to have spent the time I did in the insurance industry.
So I feel like I'd almost be remiss, speaking of insurance and coverage, you note that you worked for a Florida property insurance carrier for the last 9 years of your active insurance career. Can you give us your overall thoughts on the Florida market and what's happening and what can be done to fix it?
The first thing I'll tell you is I don't watch the Weather Channel anymore. I used to all the time, and it drove me crazy. I would get up at 4 a.m. to see if something was happening. But, Florida is a very interesting marketplace, particularly in the property world. Years ago, after Hurricane Andrew, the large national carriers all sort of deserted Florida. And what happened in those 2004, 05 sort of time frames, that a lot of small domestic companies started up, like the one I worked for. 5-6 guys got together. They got investors for the $25 million, and they started an insurance company. The greatest challenge, certainly we have catastrophes in Florida. I will tell you, the company I worked for had such a very, very thorough reinsurance program that I always felt comfortable that we would survive a storm. And by example, Irma came through, and I think our net of reinsurance was about $9 million. So I wouldn't take the job if it wasn't that way. It was one of the things I told our CEO at the time. But the marketplace today is certainly somewhat saddled with the weather-related activities and that. But I think the one reason that Florida suffers is that about 35% of the property claims are in the state of Florida, but 85% of the lawsuits on property claims are in Florida. So when you think about the challenge that brings in a state where, fortunately, legislature has started to do some things to sort of unwind that all, we would pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in defense and $50,000 in damages. And so you start to think about that relative to someone's going to pay, right? I mean, that's part of the pricing process. So that, I think, is starting to change. It's going to take a couple of years for that to sort of find its way through the marketplace today. But yeah, I lived there. The most I've ever paid for homeowners insurance was living in Florida. I paid more for homeowners insurance than I did in property taxes. So that gives you kind of a sense of what the world's like there. I think they'll crawl out of that. The trial bar is very strong in the legislature, and it's difficult. The new governor, actually it was Rick Scott, and then followed by DeSantis, were very pro-industry, and they have sort of helped urge all those things through the market.
So I joke sometimes that this industry is the Hotel California, that you can check out anytime you like and you can never leave, right? We see a lot of what I would term folks as being boomerang retirees, meaning they retire, but then the next thing you know, here we go 6 months later, and then they're back in the industry. So I want to focus on that aspect of your career right now. So can you talk us through your thought process on retiring from the carrier space, and then your decision to come back and work with all of that?
So officially I was retired for 2 weeks. I took 1 week off, went on vacation another week, and then my wife says, "Don't you have something to do with your life? Do something." Actually, I was much more deliberate about what I was going to do. 3 years before I retired, I started the momentum to create what I have today going. And the reason why I came back is twofold. One, I have a lot of knowledge and practical knowledge of how our business works, and there's a real need in our marketplace today for teaching leadership skills to young emerging leaders. Lots of, certainly the society does a lot with that, and I appreciate that, but that's my real focus today. I'm trying to find my way into those organizations where I can help them train their emerging leaders to learn how to be leaders, to be senior leaders in their companies. It takes time to do that. I'm really convinced of that. So that's why I came back. I never really left, frankly. 2 weeks doesn't count. And I just love this business. I always have. I certainly love the relationships I have with the society. It's been a really important part of my life. I spent 27 years as a volunteer, so I couldn't imagine what I would do. And then I look at my dad. My dad lived till he was 93 years old, and he worked until he was 82. And I am convinced that his long life was because he kept doing things within the realm of his skill set, and I think that really helped him stay sharp and have a long life. So that's the other piece, because I have 3 grandkids and I want to see them grow up.
So speaking of leadership, you have written your book now, Lessons in Leadership. I want to talk about the book in a second, but first I want to talk about the process of writing a book, because you talk to folks, and I feel like there's an old saying that everyone has one book in them, and yet so few books get produced. So can you talk about your decision to write the book, and then the process of actually putting pen to paper or getting in front of that computer and doing the work?
So the first thing you do when you decide you're going to write a book is don't tell anybody. Because every time you see them, they'll say, how's the book? How's the book? The idea of this started actually in 2016. I was in Iowa at the Iowa I Day for their Iowa chapter, and I had to give a presentation at the Leadership Summit that next April. And I was struggling with what I would do. And I sat on the edge of the bed, and I just started jotting down notes. What do I want to talk about? And what came to me was this sense of the kind of leader I am today is a summation of every leader, good leaders that I worked with over the years. And I started to pull attributes out of that to be sort of the core of what my book would be. The process, it's hard. Ask my wife, she'll tell you that to get me to sit down, I would do the sit down, start writing, and next thing you know, I got to take the laundry out, or I got to walk the dog. 1,000 excuses not to do it. Now that I've done it, I'm really focused. Now I get really focused on that, and I have a second book in my head. I'm not telling you when it's going to happen, but there's already one there, sort of the next piece of that. The process, I self-published, and the process is really not as difficult as a lot of people think. Ultimately, you need to be able to write a manuscript, but more importantly, a great editor. You need someone to be able to typeset, because Amazon is very specific on how they typeset, and you need a good cover designer. And with the help of Amy Waniger, she has a publishing company and a close friend. She kind of helped me through that process. Once you got to that level, it was just next step in the chain. Do this. It was fun. We went on the Moonlight Monument Tour, and we drove by the Library of Congress, and my book is there. So that was part of the process. Amy said, you want to have your book at the Library of Congress. So I went through that, and I sent a copy. I got the number so they could file it, and then I sent my book there. So that was cool. But that process is really pretty interesting to me, and it was a lot easier than I ever thought it would be, which is sort of why I'm thinking, why not do it again? I kind of know how to do it.
So along the same lines, any advice for those that are thinking about starting their first book?
First thing, write an outline. Get an idea of your thoughts. That's what I did in that hotel in Iowa. I started sort of outlining what are these attributes that I felt were important to me, sort of put them in some kind of order. It's sort of chronological, but not really. And then sort of expand on every one of those. So what were the stories behind that? And more importantly, for me, I wanted support in every one of those that wasn't necessarily my ideas, but things I used to help me better be good. So in every chapter is a call to action, and oftentimes I attribute some of the activities you need to do to make that behavior part of who you are from other people, from research that I did. So I think it gives credibility in many respects to what I'm trying to write.
Well, and that's a perfect transition to the book itself. So for our audience that might have an interest in learning more, so can you talk through the topics of the book? I'll let you I'll let you sort of talk through the theme, but I think our audience would love to hear that.
So I have this the whole hypothesis of my book is that I believe that behaviors they're not natural, they're learned. It's a nurturing effect. And you think about those sorts of things. I checked. I went through 23andMe, my DNA, and there was no leadership trait on that chart. I looked for it, but it wasn't there. But I know that watching my grandkids was one of the ways that I sort of got a sense of, I watched them watch us. They started to develop. We gave them reassurance for the good things, and we scolded them for the bad. And that became part of so that was the motivation, sort of the hypothesis. The 13 attributes that I have in here were real life things that I lived through, from my 6th grade teacher, Sister Mary Jane, to the last chapter is my dad. And my grandfather, who was my grandfather specifically, because he read to me the first time A Little Engine That Could, and he had no idea how that would affect me in my business life. I'm a firm believer that you can do anything if you put your mind to it, just like the train did. So that's the nature of it. There's a lot of great chapters. There's one chapter that's particularly, well, there's two. The first one is my chapter on courage. It's chapter 5. It's 4 women in my life that are amazing. So I wanted people to know that. The next one is one of my dad, about being selfless. I really believe, because I worked for some amazing selfless leaders, that people appreciate that, they respect it. And when I say that, I mean, I always said that you give credit to everybody else in the room, and and I was sitting in front of the board of directors and something went wrong, it was my fault. And I knew that I would go back to the team and we'd talk about how we're going to fix that, but I never blamed them in front of anybody. And that's an important part of being selfless, is that you take the responsibility for things. It's like servant leadership, you know. Somebody needs to empty the waste baskets, and if they weren't done, I would do it, because people appreciate the fact they came in their waste baskets with. So that's sort of the basis of that. There's so many great chapters in there. I write about my mother-in-law and the courage. She was an amazing woman. Most of my Boy Scout leader, about engagement, sort of this whole notion of that. My one manager is in there twice. She had such an effect on my career. And if you notice in the book, there's a lot of women that I worked for over the years that really helped me become the sort of leader that I am.
Terrific. And maybe, not to overshare here, but maybe would you mind sort of walking through one of the traits that you talk about, and maybe one of the chapters of the book, to give our listeners an example of what they can expect?
I talk about trust, because that's a very important trait. Right? We heard about it today at one of the speeches by Gretchen Humphreys from Hanover and Olivet. But I worked for a manager earlier in my career, and I was the youngest underwriter on her team. And I worked hard, because I think table stakes is working hard. So I worked hard, and I would come to her all the time with a decision that I was wrestling with. And in that decision, she would always say, well, what's your idea? What do you want to do? And she says, don't come in here with one, come in here with 2 ideas. Which one do you want to do? And we'll talk through it. So we did that, and it really helped my development as an underwriter. But after a while, she would come in and say, well, why are you here? She said, I trust you to make the decision, so go make it. And I was really scared. At that point, it's like, I don't want to make any decisions. I was paralyzed. But the fun part was, she went on vacation. I was the least tenured person on her team, and she made me in charge of the unit. And I was doing everyone else's referrals. And I thought, this is not right. I'm scared to death. And I told her, I said, I'm scared to death. She says, Mike, just do what you think is right. Talk to the team, talk to the issue, and make the decision. I got you. She said to me, Mike, I will never, ever put you in a position where you feel like you're not being supported. I will always be there. So even if you make a mistake, it's not fatal. It's really more about learning from that and not doing it again and again and again. And so Lois, who's my supervisor, she really stressed that with me. And that became a really important part of my life. And I know myself, and I think most people would say that, is if you work for a manager or anybody you're reporting to that you feel trusts you and they're trustworthy, that I would do anything for her. I'd go through a wall if she asked me to do that, because I knew she had my best interest at heart all the time.
So along those same lines, when you think about training and developing your own people as you grew through the leadership ranks, how would you describe your approach? And what do you think is the most effective way to train and develop people?
I have always believed that you pull up a chair, not across the desk from them, but next to them. So when I trained underwriters, the computer screen was here, and I would swing my chair around and sit next to them, and we would look at it together. And I would like to see sort of the progression they would go through, the decision progression. And then when they were in a place, I would ask questions. Well, how about this? Oh, I hadn't thought about that. So they would add that to their process. I believe that we were able to train people in a very effective way that way. But the other part is to give people an opportunity to make decisions and then stand behind them, just like Lois stood behind me. And not suggest that it's fatal, that it's the end of your world if you do that. And so that was how that was. And then to give recognition, just like I said before, it wasn't all about me. I did very little in some of the positions I was in other than steering the ship. But they were the people that were getting the great results. So making sure that you're acknowledging people, not just the negative things they do. I think of those more as development activities. People get a little tired of hearing that, but to stress that we need to get better all the time. But then when you do a great job, I want everybody to know, not just within the team, but within the whole organization. People appreciate that too.
In terms of instilling leadership qualities in someone else, what's your approach to that? I mean, in terms of the training and focusing on the skill set?
So I think, just like my book, I think everyone has the opportunity. We call it Born to Lead because I think we're all born to lead. It's just a choice we make, right? And I was fortunate to be in the industry when the carrier I was with initially trained every leader. As they moved into the management position, we had training. We did that pretty regularly, a couple times a year. We'd go to Seattle and we called it Charm School, which you went up there and sat in front of the board so they'd scare you to death. But the reality of that is you give the people the opportunity to do things that they didn't necessarily do. Lois did to me, in part of my development, the opportunity to walk in her shoes. So she left and I had to do her job. I didn't mind doing it. It was kind of fun, but it was still scary as all hell. But I knew Lois had my back. So if I messed up or if someone on the team was a little maybe upset with the decision I made. But in terms of teaching leadership, so many carriers, I think, today have abdicated that responsibility. They don't seem to be interested in doing it. I think they talk about they'd like to do it, but I don't see the activities in companies today that I had years ago. And I think that's an important part of this. So what I'm hoping to do is to get in front of these organizations, small at first probably. I need to get my sort of name out there a little bit, but to get in front of them and say, let me help you train these leaders how to be leaders. I'm a firm believer that once you've done with your CPCU, the next step is an MBA. You need to learn how to be a senior leader. I mean, you know that. When you're in a room with a bunch of senior leaders, it's a very different experience than you're in the room with your peers or those who report to you. You need to know how to act in those situations. And I believe good MBA programs teach you how to think strategically. From a management perspective, from marketing, they teach you organizational behavior in a different way so that you find your way to navigate into those situations and be as effective as you can be. I believe that's a piece that's missing in our business today, and that's the part of my focus. I know we do a lot here. I'm hoping that I can supplement what the society does as well with Thunderbird School and that to kind of help bring real-life experience to the things, the 44 years of business.
Terrific. And before we move off the book, where can folks find the book if they'd like to pick up a copy?
If you come to the, this is the pitch time now. Yeah, come to the Olivet table. I've got books there. Certainly you can go to Amazon.com under Born to Lead, Lessons in Leadership. It's available, hardcover and softcover. You can pick them both there. What's amazing about that whole process is if you ordered a softcover book today, it gets printed and mailed in 2 days. They don't have a stockpile. Every order is a new print. So it's pretty amazing that they can do that in 10 days. Jeff Bezos built an amazing system there.
Fair enough. And I want to focus for a few minutes on your CPCU involvement and experience. So why have you been so active with the society over the years?
Well, this is my family. That's how I think about it. I mean, I come to these meetings and I see people all the time, right, that have been to these meetings. And then I get to meet a lot of new people, too. And I really think it's important that these meetings, because I went to my conferment. I'll confess to the world right now, I didn't even go to any sessions other than the keynote, the conferment, the keynote, and then the next big keynote address. And then I was on vacation. We were in New York, and so. But I got involved because a claims manager, he was the VP, dragged me to a chapter meeting. I got volunteered immediately to take on a role there as membership chair, and I've been in a position of leadership in the society all that time. Every one of them brought a different perspective for me in terms of how I might manage my world outside of the society. managing people, I've always believed that if you're in a leadership role here, you get the chance to lead with no risks, right? You're not going to get fired. No, you're not going to get performance review, and everybody's here to help you. That's really what it comes down to, and that's one of the values. So I tried to do that because others did that for me as I was sort of making my way through the chairs. It was the greatest honor in my career, and I think you feel the same way, that being the society president was probably one of the greatest years I had in the business. 2017, even though a hurricane came through, I went to so many chapters. I went overseas to Europe. I got to meet so many people, amazing people. We have such a great group of people in the society, and that's what keeps me coming back, right? And certainly, I think it's important to stay relevant knowledge-wise. People say, well, why now? You're retired. It's, no, I'm not really retired. I've just changed what I was doing from one thing to another, and I want to continue to understand what the issues are related to our business.
You mentioned this in the book, and I know we've talked about it personally a bit, but your commitment was really tested when, well, if you want to talk through the process of applying or submitting your name for the global presidency, and well, please tell the story for those who may not be familiar.
So well, the first I applied to be on Leadership Council the first time, and I was in the interview, and they asked me during the interview, as it started, would you consider the vice president? We had a vice president role then. They since eliminated that, and I basically told them I'm not ready. If you want to consider me, fine, but I don't think I'm ready. So I'll interview for this, and you choose. And they chose someone else for the vice president. I got the chapter governor position or leadership council position, and then I was in that role. A very close friend of mine, Cindy Barraway, a great mentor. She kind of coached me through a lot of that to make sure that I understood, because she was in that room when I interviewed. Then there was an opening again. I got a call. We were in Anaheim at the meeting in Anaheim, and I can't remember who called me, but they called and said, we have a change. We need to interview people for the president-elect position. Are you interested? Well, I felt like I was better prepared then. So I said, certainly, when? 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Well, I didn't sleep that night. I was like up all night worried about it. My wife says to me, you'll be fine, don't worry. So I go down to the interview, go through the whole process, and then they took me aside and said, sorry, but you didn't get it this time. But don't give up, keep applying. I was devastated. In fact, Cindy had to talk me off the ledge. I'm about ready to quit the whole society because I just didn't understand where I was at that point. And fortunately for Cindy, I stayed on. What I learned is those first 2 times, I was competing against guys named Brian. And so the next time I applied, I said, is there anybody named Brian in here? Because I don't want to apply if there is, and there wasn't. But the third time was the charm for me. And part of it was, to his credit, Rick Lambert, who was the head of the nominating committee for a long time, told me, Mike, it's not your time right now. It's going to be your time next year. And I thought, well, okay, I understand where you're coming from, right? And that was really reassuring for me to hear that. So that was my process. I ended up being the society president in 2017, and like I said, it was the greatest year in my career relative to the CPCU Society, no question.
So last question, Mike, is you think about where you are today, and you think about where you were when you got started 40-some years ago. Is there anything that you wish you knew then that you know now?
Oh, geez. I wish I knew a lot more. That's a really hard question to answer, I guess. The problem with that time period for me is I was in a lot of different roles, and I really, first and foremost, I wish I'd started insurance sooner. I wish I didn't go into the banking business. I probably would have been a risk management major, but they didn't have them back in 1978. That's probably one thing. The other was I took a large period of time off of study for CPCU, and because of the role I was in, and I often think of that as sort of a cop-out. There's no reason why I should have done that. I could have passed those exams during that time, but I decided I was too focused on traveling. I was gone every Monday through Friday for 3 weeks a month. But I know lots of people that have done that. I could have done it too. So that would be the other thing, is that don't give up on this. Stay engaged. I struggled with getting my MBA because I didn't think it was really that important to me, and so I finally did it 2 years ago. People say, what 65-year-old guy gets an MBA? I'm that guy. But it was more about knowledge, trying to understand how things fit together. So if I was to talk to myself, the 24-year-old coming out of college, those are the things I'd say. Stay engaged. Finish. I'm always amazed at new designees that do this in a year or 18 months. But stay engaged through that, and don't give up. Keep going. And then even once you get involved, thanks to Cindy, she talked me off the ledge, but don't give up. I know I was talking to Anita Bork yesterday, and she was turned down 3 times before she became the first woman. So think about that kind of experience too. And I asked her, how'd you feel? And she said, the same. It was the same as what I was feeling. Why am I doing this? So that's what I would tell myself. Stay engaged. Just keep moving forward. Learn all you can learn. And because I am a firm believer that as I made those steps in my career, the opportunities came to me in my work life that I don't think would have ever happened if I didn't have them.
I've been speaking with Mike Koscielny. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. It was great getting to talk with you.
No, thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
And thank you to Gallagher Bassett for making these on-site recordings possible at InterRisk 2023 in Washington, D.C. This is Chris Hampshire saying goodbye for now, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. I hope you'll be back for the next In the Know podcast, the CPCU Society Unscripted.
Thank you for listening to In the Know, the CPCU Society Unscripted. Ensure your success by subscribing to the In the Know podcast series now. To learn more about the CPCU Society, its membership and educational offerings, tools, and programs, please visit cpcusociety.org and follow on social media at CPCU Society.